Schiff is the biggest liar of all. So no one cares what Schiff says the intelligence says because he's a liar, bona fide. And he got censured for that, loser.
They were notified after the planes were safely out. Yeah. We complied with the notification requirements of the War Powers Act.
Yes, complied.
They were immediately thereafter.
This is a huge change in the Middle East. It was a decisive action. It was the right thing to do. I thought somebody should do it for a long time, but better late than never.
Democrats already calling for Trump's impeachment after the bombs dropped in Iran. AOC, who might be joined by Thomas Massie at some point, because boy, Massie is out there also saying things like what Trump did is not constitutional. And that's a curious thing to say, because if it's unconstitutional, what are you going to do about it there, Thomas? Are you going to support your colleague, AOC? AOC says the president's disastrous decision to bomb Iran without authorization of AOC is a grave violation of the Constitution and the Congressional war powers. He has impulsively risked launching a war. Wait, are we in war or not? So it's like we're not declaring war, so is this a war powers problem? Risked launching a war that may ensnare us for generations. She says it is absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment, which we will not tolerate here. Now, what's curious about this is the fact that Thomas is also joining in on this fray. And we saw he was also out, made an interview on this with Ro Khanna, another Democrat. So maybe Thomas is going to come and join the Democrats now, since he's basically cavorting with them, saying this is not constitutional. So what do you want to do about it? Do you want to impeach the president? Maybe that is what you want to do. Mike Johnson came out, the Speaker of the House, who would help with impeachment proceedings if this goes that way, which it obviously won't. But think about this next term, right? What if the midterms happen? There's a shift in the balance of power. The Republicans lose the House. AOC and Hakeem take over, and Thomas Massie joins in on the impeachments. The president made the right call and did what he needed to do. Leaders in Congress were aware of the urgency of this situation, and the commander-in-chief evaluated that the imminent danger outweighed the time it would take for Congress to act. All right. The world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, which chants death to America, simply could not be allowed the opportunity to obtain and use a nuclear weapon. The president fully respects the Article 1 power of Congress. AOC, chill out, Thomas. And tonight's necessary, limited, and targeted strike follows the history and the tradition of similar military actions under presidents of both parties. Obviously, we've been at war basically my whole life. We had 9/11 when I was in high school. And from then on, and even before that, Clinton was bombing a bunch of people too. So it's like, wake up, I'm like 5 years old. Think of what's going on TV. We're bombing Serbia, bombing. We're bombing everything all over the world, which is, I think, why people are tired of the strategy, because it doesn't seem like it's solved anything. But we did it for 30 years, and Iran is still like, we're still going to nuke you guys. So according to them. So maybe the policy, maybe the foreign engagement strategy brought by the Boltons and the Grahams and the Pompeos and the rest of them is failed. And there should be a different approach. Obviously not happening this administration. Johnson was out talking about it. Sure, we're not that interested in watching Massie anyways. Says Fetterman. He came out and he supports it, right? So even if impeachment percolates, like even Democrats who are in the Senate are never going to convict Trump, even if the House comes back on this basis and gets an impeachment after the midterms, for example. Fetterman says, as long maintained, this was the correct move by POTUS. Iran is the world's leading sponsor of terrorism and cannot have nuclear capabilities. I'm grateful for and salute the finest military in the world, from Fetterman. So you see here, pencil neck Schiff came out and he's having a hard time trying to figure this out. CNN is also having a hard time trying to figure this out too. So I know it's not interesting to watch Schiff a lot. Here's them.
These strikes against Iran last night. He says that they have been successful. Do you see any upside, any positive news for the security of the world in learning of the success of these strikes?
First of all, Casey, I want to express my gratitude that the pilots are all out safely and acknowledge the skill, the bravery, and the professionalism of all the military forces that were engaged in this military operation. But it's not an operation that should have ever been authorized by the president in the absence of intelligence showing that Iran had made the decision to break out and build a bomb. The intelligence I've seen, and it's been limited, indicates that Iran had certainly enriched uranium but had not made the decision to build a bomb or pursue the mechanism of a bomb. And in the absence of that, this is not a strike that should have been ordered. And watching Hegseth during that...
Schiff is the biggest liar of all. He lied in Congress about all of his intelligence related to President Trump and Crossfire Hurricane and a bunch of crap. So no one cares what Schiff says the intelligence says because he's a liar, bona fide. And he got censured for that, loser. Not that many people in American history have been censured, my friends. And so let us not ever forget that this guy walks around around with a big asterisk right on his forehead that says censured on it.
A press conference this morning, we saw a lot of arrogance from the defense secretary. And as wars in the Middle East have demonstrated, arrogance is a deadly commodity. We simply don't know what is going to occur now, whether Iran will retaliate, whether Iran was able to evacuate some of the enriched material from Fordo. There were commercial satellite images of trucks lined up at Fordo and leaving Fordo in the days preceding the strike. So a lot of questions, including the risk to American service members. In terms of, is there anything positive to come out of it? Yes. I mean, the destruction of these facilities is a positive in the sense that it will set back Iran's program. And look, this is a nefarious regime. That is the preeminent state sponsor of terror. It should have never been pursuing a nuclear program. But it is very possible, and I think we have to anticipate, Iran now kicks out any inspectors. It leaves the non-proliferation treaty. And if it wasn't in a sprint for a bomb, it is now going to engage in a sprint for the bomb. So a lot of uncertainty. Finally, this was not constitutional, was not lawful in the absence of a declaration by Congress. And so administration should have come to Congress. We will have a vote on a war powers resolution. But there's a reason to bring this to Congress, and it is you want the Congress bought in. You want the American people bought in on an action this substantial that could lead to a major outbreak of war.
I think he's going to say it's more safe, right? Or he has to say. It's kind of a dumb thing if he would say otherwise, because he just said, yeah, we just did damage to their facilities. But I think it's a weird thing to request. It sounds like Pencil is saying that we should have all voted or something, or been engaged in this when it comes to dropping those bombs. Like, we should have scheduled it for a public hearing and then had the dates publicized so they knew it was coming, I guess. It's not a surprise. You just, yeah, bomb them on Friday. Who wants to vote for it? Yes or no? All in favor? Aye. Congress, yay. So, and then they vote and then drop the bombs. I don't think that's how it works. So Congress was actually informed on this. We got this one. Hegseth got asked about it. He says, oh yeah, no, we told him after the bombing was done.
They were notified after the planes were safely out. Yeah. We complied with the notification requirements of the War Powers Act.
Yeah, it's complied.
They were immediately thereafter.
Immediately after they were notified, totally in compliance with the law. And so just relax, everybody. This was Dan Turrentine. He came out and he usually represents the Democratic wing of the conversation. And he said, you know, it was too depressing to write this last night. After we got off the air, so I went to bed. But it needs to be said by more Democrats, all right? This was not an impeachable offense, Alexandria. And Trump did not need congressional approval for one precision attack under the circumstances, just like Obama didn't when he took out bin Laden, allegedly. Why can't our party just say it's great, we achieved the objective and destroyed Iran's nuclear sites? Because they can't. God bless the soldiers who carried this out and made it home safely. God bless our country, military allies, and we look forward to a full intel briefing. If one must then assert congressional authority at that moment, add that any escalation will require congressional approval. And if you must express concern for where this may go and what might come next, then do that. But for so many in my party, like AOC and Thomas, who's not even in his party, and Shifty, to knee-jerk with unhinged calls for impeachment, this is unconstitutional, and sadly they omit in their statement support for Iran not having nuclear weapons, which most of them agree with, which has been a principle of our party, the Democrats, for 40 years, is truly TDS. Calling it out on his own side, man. Shout out to Dan Turrentine on that. So Lawler was out. Mike Lawler, he is a representative over from New York. Huge fan of the SALT cap tax. Loves that New York gets discounts on their high taxes. But anyways, he's out here. A little snippet of him on the other side of Massie in the House.
Well, we're privileged to be joined by him. Congressman Mike Lawler, are you there?
Prime Minister Netanyahu and King Abdullah while we were there. And obviously there was a lot of discussion around Iran and its nuclear program and the potential of an Israeli strike. Prime Minister Netanyahu made very clear that there was zero chance he would allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And obviously in recent years, they have come dangerously close to producing enough weapons to attack Israel. And given the fact that they have been the greatest state sponsor of terror, they have funded Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terror proxies in the region to not only attack Israel, as we saw on October 7th and as we saw with Iran's ballistic missiles attacks last April and October. But the fact is that Iran has targeted U.S. forces in the region.
All right, so they got hit. Now, we also got Bolton. Here was a little bit of Bolton, the mustache. He is here explaining Trump did a great thing.
For being here. Were you surprised that President Trump took such decisive action?
Well, let me say this unequivocally. I think President Trump made the right decision for America to attack Iran's nuclear weapons program. And I think we're on the verge of potentially seeing regime change in Iran as part of that. I think this is a huge change in the Middle East. It was a decisive action. It was the right thing to do. I thought thought somebody should do it for a long time, but better late than never.
Better late than never from Bolton. So Trump also said this, right? If they even think about striking back, there may be some serious problems for you Iranians. If any retaliation by Iran against the United States will be met by force far greater than what was witnessed yesterday. Thank you, Trump, President of the United States. And Rubio was also making the rounds this morning. He says, listen, this is not a war, okay? We are not at war. It's just a little bombing that needed to be happening. It's like spring cleaning, taking out the nukes, the nuclear fissile material every year. It's like somewhere it's just accumulating like gunk on the planet. We just got to go clean it out every now and then, but it's not a war, definitely.
Are we now at war with Iran?
No.
No, this is not a war against Iran. This is very simple. 67 days ago, the President of the United States sent the Iranians a letter and it said, you're not going to have nuclear weapons. You're not going to have a militarized nuclear program. Let's negotiate. I want to do this diplomatically. I want to do this peacefully. They tried to play him along the way they've played every American president for the last 35 years. And, the president told them, if we don't get a deal, which is what he wanted, then I'll have to handle it differently. And that's what he did last night. He handled it differently. But that was an Iranian choice. We didn't make that choice. They did. By playing games with Donald Trump, they made a huge mistake. And President Trump acted last night. And I think the world today is safer and more stable than it was 24 hours ago. And a bunch of these countries putting out statements condemning us privately, they all agree with us that this needed to be done. They got to do what they got to do for, their own public relations purposes. But the only people in the world that are unhappy about what happened in Iran last night is the regime in Iran.
Have you heard from anyone in Iran, and are you expecting retaliation?
Well, if they retaliate, it'll be the worst mistake they've ever made. Look, we can fly in and out of Iran at will. We went in last night. The president sent our military forces from halfway across the world, went in, conducted this operation, left. Not a shot was fired against us. They didn't even know what had happened. By the time we left, the planes were out of their airspace before they finally started realizing they had been hit. So it would be a terrible mistake if Iran retaliates. But that's not our goal. We are not declaring war on Iran. We're not looking for war on Iran. But if they attack us, then I think we have capabilities they haven't even seen yet. It would be a terrible mistake on their part. And frankly, it's not what we hope for or wish. What we want now is to ensure that Iran never has nuclear weapons. If what they want is a civil nuclear program where they have power plants like a lot of other countries in the world have, they can do that. That's the deal that's been offered to them. They rejected it. They played us. They tried to play us, I should say. They wouldn't respond to our offers. They disappeared for 10 days. And now, the president had to take action as a response.
Yeah, we got it. So the question, of course, is what does the rest of the world have to say? Because it is a big world out there. And the New York Times gave us an update and a little bit of a recap here on all the countries. The UN came out. Antonio Guterres says that he was gravely alarmed, saying the strikes are a dangerous escalation in a region already on edge, saying there's a growing risk that this conflict could rapidly get out of control with catastrophic consequences for the world. European Union, the bloc's top diplomat called Kaja Kallas, urged all sides to get back to the negotiating table. She said Iran must not be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. Okay, so 1 point to Iran, 1 point to Israel. China, the government in Beijing said it strongly condemns the U.S. strike and called for an immediate ceasefire. Okay, great. So China joins in with the Iranians. A statement published by the state broadcaster attributed to the foreign ministry said the U.S. actions seriously violate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, which are totally irrelevant in the domain of international power. It's like, okay, law, whatever. No one cares. Ultimately, no one cares, right? In Russia, Ukraine, NATO, all of them, mostly it's just about raw power, truthfully, and resource control. You have the laws, pass the constitutions, whatever. It's a pretty dog-eat-dog world out there, though. And exacerbate tensions in the Middle East. And by the way, those, traditional norms are just lever points to create blocks that are basically artificial, that have no real meaning or purpose together. Like you create like the United Nations, like a bunch of nations, most of which have nothing in common. So what are you united about? I don't know. We belong to some stupid named organization. Can you guys do anything? No. Do you want them to do all the things that they want to do? No. So you're not united with them at all? No. But you're just part of this body, which makes everybody feel good. And then you can always defer to the UN. It's like, how about you just align yourselves on interests, right? Which is how people actually organize themselves. But they're living in a fantasy land of idealism where they create these institutional pillars and they try to wrap a bunch of stuff around them. And China uses it against us when we violate them, which we do all the time. And I mean, the West versus China. So they say they seriously violate the purposes and the principles of the UN Charter. I'm like, yeah, so just, well, how about they go do that with Taiwan and we'll see what we say about that. Britain said can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. He called on Iran to return to the negotiating table. This is Keir Starmer in the UK. Jean-Noel Barrot, over from France, foreign minister, said she's got concerns over the U.S. bombing. France was not involved in these. France France opposes a nuclear-armed Iran, and only diplomacy can bring a lasting solution. Then they surrendered immediately to everybody. Russia, longtime ally of Iran. Russia strongly condemned the U.S. attack, calling it irresponsible and a gross violation of international law. So another one like China. In a statement, Russia's foreign ministry called on the UN Security Council to put an end to confrontational acts by Israel and the UN. Spain, they said they expressed utmost concern about Middle East, called for negotiation, reiterated a call for restraint and respect. Australia called for de-escalation. They echoed some of Trump's language. They said, we've been clear that they can't have a nuke. Saudi Arabia, in the region, said the foreign ministry called for de-escalation and restraint, also said deep concern. The statement stopped short of condemning the U.S., although the foreign ministry had earlier condemned Israel's attacks on Iran. Saudi Arabia depends heavily on American military support, hosts a lot of other military bases that could be the target of Iranians. Lebanon, President Joseph there urged restraint. New Zealand said ongoing action, military action, is extremely worrying in New Zealand. South Korea condemned the uncertainty. Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, she says they called for diplomatic dialogue and peace. We reiterate our call for de-escalation. Venezuela and others, Venezuela, you'd imagine they called it extremely dangerous and an act of aggression. Chile said we demand and need peace. And Cuba called it a dangerous escalation. So the traditional Axis powers are aligning themselves. Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, the allied powers, UK, France, America, New Zealand, Australia will be coming in on the other side as the pieces get moved around, hopefully in an effort to resolve the conflict. Of course, we'll see where it goes. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do.